Well, hi everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I know we have a kind of a small crowd, but hopefully some more folks will filter in as our amazing conversation gets started. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Acevedo. I am the editor-in-chief of a magazine called VMSD, and we are producing 7 different sessions that are retail-specific sessions at InfoComm for the first time this year. This is our 2nd session of the week. We have 3 more tomorrow as well, so if you have an interest in retail, be sure to check those out. Today we are here to talk about collaborative design for retail spaces, and I just want to introduce my esteemed panelists here. To my left here is Mary Franck, Senior Interaction Designer with ESI Design. To her left, Megan Kachur, Manager, Immersive Retail Design and Development for Disney Parks and Resorts. And to Megan's left on the end there is Juan Santos, Senior Vice President of Brand Experience for Tavistock. So please welcome all of our panelists to the stage. Thank you so much for being here to share your expertise with the audience. The reason that we put this panel together, it actually started with a conversation that I had with one of Mary's colleagues at ESI. And the idea was, I think all of the stakeholders in the process of retail design, whether you're an architect, whether you're an experience designer, an integrator, somebody that's working more on the brand side, I think we get into our little silos and we don't necessarily bring members of the team in ideally at the beginning of the process. And so we get into issues with feasibility. And there are better ways to do things, I think, when we get everyone kind of seated at the table at the beginning of the process. So that's kind of how this conversation was born. Wouldn't it be great to get all of these stakeholders together and have a conversation about best practices and about lessons learned and kind of share from each of our individual perspectives on a retail project, mistakes that we necessarily don't have to make or opportunities that we can take and use to our advantage. So that's kind of our purpose for being here today. Again, like I said, thank you for joining us. And I'm just going to start out by going down the row. I think we'll start with Mary. If you wouldn't just explain to the audience real quick your role at ESI, your background, and kind of how you fit into the whole process.
Yes, of course. Hi, I'm Mary Franck, Senior Designer at ESI, and my role is in software and media. So we bring together holistic teams of, AV designers, people who are oriented towards the technology and systems for installations, software designers and programmers, people who do media, motion graphics, that kind of thing, content writers and strategists. We put a whole team together to do our design work. And so we work with people like Megan and Juan to take their brand ideas and implement them in a specific space. And so it is a really collaborative process, and it's important for us to be able to engage a number of stakeholders. More on that soon.
Excellent. Megan?
Hi, Megan Kachur. And I work in a little tiny team, tiny department that we call Immersive Retail Design and Development, which is actually relatively new in our organization. And the goal of our team is actually twofold. We use trend forecasting, which of course keeps our organization aware of what's going on in terms of retail. But at the same time, we're also using guest-based innovation or design thinking to create specific products and experiences. So I will work in any given year with a number of teams to create those products and those experiences that then people like Mary will design and bring to life. And much of what we do, though, is really look at what's going on in the market and pair that to the overall guest experience and to see where we can actually meet those either unmet needs, as we might say, or create something that is very differentiated in the portfolio of what we have today. That's ultimately what we want to do. And to do that, we definitely, as you're saying, need quite a bit of collaboration and partners and even process that may be somewhat atypical from what we would see in our broader organization. So that always makes it fun too.
And I'm Juan Santos. I work with Tavistock, and Tavistock Development is a kind of unique real estate developer. We have a variety of different places that we're developing, the closest of which is about 15 minutes drive from here. It's called Lake Nona. It's 17 square miles, so it's, to give you an idea, if you're thinking about Manhattan, that's from the south side to like 80th Street. So it's a large chunk of land. It has all types of environments. It has residential, it has commercial, it has retail, it has entertainment, it has non-traditional retail. We just opened a container park, which is a food venue / retail space. What's different about how we approach it is that we build and in many cases we operate. We have a restaurant group, we have a few retail outlets that are our own, and then we also work with retailers that want to come into the properties that we build. So we have that experience from the two sides of the house. We're sometimes our own clients, and sometimes we work with other clients. And in our space, because we are across the full life cycle from taking the piece of land to, in some cases, being the tenant of the retail operation, we have to be very collaborative, both internally, cross-disciplinarily, and then with other people to make sure that we have successful environments that people want to be in and that people enjoy.
Excellent. Next question I'm going to ask you folks, and I know there's no such thing as a typical retail project, but if you could kind of just give the folks in the audience an idea of how a typical project goes from kind of concept to build out. And Megan, I'm going to start with you on this one because I know you are definitely at the very beginning of that process.
Well, if we're lucky, we're at the very beginning of that process.
Good point.
One of the greatest things that you can be involved in is the beginning and actually understanding all of the stakeholders, that ultimate vision, where the team wants to go, and all of the different components. I think the part of the challenge of organizations in general is that there's so many different processes that are going on within them at the same time. And so you kind of have to figure out and be pretty nimble in terms of saying, well, at what point, how do we do this within time? How do we do this with finance constraints? And even if you have a great process that you love, you're going to invariably have to manipulate it in some ways to actually hit your mark. Yep. And I think that that's something that when you come out of, regardless of your background or your education, you come out confidently thinking, oh yes, I understand this process, and by the book, you know it to the letter, and then you're in that environment, and all of a sudden you realize that none of those rules that you really learned applied, because the culture is what's going to drive it. So how do you stay true to that that process that will get the best results while being integrated with the culture? So what will happen is, depending on when we are involved, we have done projects, we've done design sprints that can be anything from a week. You can put a team in place. You can say, guys, we are working from 8 till 5. We're going to work from Monday through Friday. And by then, we will have concepts that we can turn over to design. But then very often, you're brought into something at the second or last step, or maybe it's already been prototyped, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do you do then? And of course, by then, you're usually in the case of, well, we have to go back and try to upgrade or enhance as best we can to get this to market. So then you're looking at a completely different timeline. Yes. So I would say with all of that, the kind of the parting advice in that is that organizations who give teams such as ours that breathing room, that they can say, you know what, it's okay, step back and do what you need to do. Right. That's really where you really need that flexibility, versus saying, no, we must go by the book. We must go by, production timelines and traditional schedules. So I think it's kind of knowing when to flex and instinctively, and once you get into that environment, that's something that you can adjust to quickly.
Absolutely. And you mentioned too, you do a lot of trends forecasting, so I imagine you're gathering lots and lots of data from your guests, as well as looking at overall industry trends. When you are in that situation where you are kind of coming in midstream, how much of that stuff is applicable? How much of that stuff can you still kind of infuse into the project, or I guess it just depends from project to project?
I would definitely say, I always answer everything with, it depends. It's the best answer. And it also depends on who you're targeting.
Okay.
So if we think about, very often when we think about guest-centered design, or we think about consumer-centric design. So it's understanding who you're capturing beautifully today. At Walt Disney World, we have so many fans who love our parks, who love our stories, which is wonderful. But any and every organization wants to be thinking beyond that, the consumer that they're not reaching today. And that's actually a very tricky place, because the comfortable place for any organization or any team to build is with what you know. Yeah. It's beyond where you can't see that is actually somewhat more difficult. So depending specifically on what it is that you're building, that's when you're using that information differently. There are some things that are almost reflexive, you know, in terms of the retail experience, what to deliver, you know what that product needs to be, right? And that will protect the base, that core, but it's when we start to shift our thinking to something that's truly future focused.
That's a great point.
That we start to use research, or we start to use profiles that maybe organizationally may be completely new, may not be comfortable. That's when it gets
Tricky.
hard and fun at the same time. That's what makes it fun.
That's a great point, absolutely. I'm going to hand off to you, Mary, now and ask you the same question. So Megan's done her job. She's handed off to you.
Yes.
Explain to us what happens.
Well, you know, we specialize in making experiences for the built environment. So, you know, not something temporary, something that's really made to last, and something that's made to enhance a space architecturally. And so, so much of our work is about collaborating with the architectural team and with the real estate team. And so, usually we're brought in based on the architectural timeline. So we'll have a brief from, you know, the brand team, from, you know, or from the retail team, for example. And it's about thinking through conceptually how to enliven the space. So we go through a concept sprint right away. And so we make sure that we're able to reflect back to, you know, a client such as yourself, the right values, the right expression. Usually our clients they're not leaning on us with, you know, we're not working directly with their creative team until later. So so often we'll start off with big ideas, just, you know, the brand values. And so after the concept sprint, after we've come up with something that's really particular to the place that we're working in, particular to the building, then we start to go into a more production-oriented strategy.
Okay. And is it a mix of projects then, where some you're involved in from the concept and others you're kind of getting it turned over to you more midstream, where they have a better idea of what they're doing? Is it kind of a blend of those two types of projects, or are you guys more insistent on, you know, we want to be involved from the start?
We always are involved from the start.
Okay.
That's right. And
Good to
then
hear.
we bring in a number of partners for
Excellent.
production. And so I think that I think the ideal situation is when someone wants to reach beyond what their internal creative team is capable of and do something a little bit new.
Excellent. And Juan, the same question to you.
Well, so we sometimes build those things. So the challenge that I found, and I'm relatively new to the world of building, like with bricks and physical pieces. I was more on the digital side before, and where weeks are considered crazy timelines. One of the challenges that we have is that we think really in 2 years timelines. If you look at the full pipeline from when you get permitting to do something, which is a huge part of the equation that very few people talk about, is there's a significant amount of time where you have to declare the use that you want to give to a particular location, use of land, modifications, and then there is a process that is difficult for you to actually measure because it doesn't depend on you. It's an external regulatory process.
Right.
After that piece, then you start building or you start modifying a space. You're sometimes 18 months, 24 months away. So one of the challenges that we have is that those ideas that may have been there in the beginning may have been completely disrupted, right? By the time you're even halfway through the process. Yep. So one of the challenges that we're trying to actually understand now is how do you build fungible, changeable spaces, right? Or changeable environments where you can actually address certain needs. So you have some needs for people circulation, and you may have some needs for people to, you know, stay or go or park or those types of issues. But then you're allowing yourself like a secondary design sprint at some point in time where you say, okay, we have most of it done, but, you know, we hadn't thought about, you know, Uber and Lyft, right, as a way to do that. So does that change the way that we create our arrival sequence into our space? And we're trying to figure out a way to allow for that secondary process to actually have an effect on the things that we build, because it's a long timeline with a lot of change in the middle.
Yes.
That's the one thing about retail that's unique, is that you're, for the most part, building environments that take months, if not years, to complete. But the world is changing completely. I mean, 6 months from now, I really cannot tell you what the big changes are going to be in the way that actually people interact with product in a store. We may be seeing some on the floor, but...
That is part of the appeal of digital, though, because, of course, you can always have the latest the latest campaign, the latest messaging, the latest product highlighted. And so having that be more beautifully incorporated into the spaces is part of what we always seek to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I imagine, too, we were having a little side conversation before we got up on stage just about temporary retail and about transient retail. And so these things are only becoming more prevalent in today's world. And I imagine that you're seeing...
I've looked at least 5 companies whose business model is to actually put things in existing stores on a temporary basis. So literally, you want to rent a table or a rack at a specific retailer. There's people that will actually arrange that and give you a month of 2 J-hooks, right, for you to put some product, like literally, for you to put some product in, bypassing the traditional model where you have to be a retailer, where you actually have to get your products codified by the retailer itself and by a buyer kind of process. This is more like, take the risk. If it meets kind of like the needs of my store, if it's logical for what I have, I'll rent you, 9 linear feet.
Amazing.
Internally in the store. Now, it's not the most prevalent form of retail, but there are pieces that are actually having a significant change in the way
It's
that
the
we look at
WeWork
the
model
space.
of retail.
Exactly.
Yes, it is.
For retail, yeah, exactly. So given that environment, given the fact that literally things are changing, and one of the things I like to say is the only constant in retail is that it's constantly changing.
Yes.
So given that, where do we see the opportunities for collaboration to kind of improve our end result? And Megan, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Well, I think in one way, given the fact that when we look at retail specifically, we are looking at what we almost call as a team the anti-Amazon approach. What are you going to do or produce or create that is going to force someone to say, you know what, I can't do this online, or I need to put down my phone and I need to come to you. And to do that, at least the closest that we know, is experience and engagement. So the challenge with that is that experiences for the guest are not one-dimensional things. There's no such thing as, well, perhaps there is, but as a singular retail experience is not very compelling. You need other elements in it. There needs to be, there's often entertainment or food and beverage or other lines of businesses all play. So you have this beautiful hybridization going on. And I think the challenge with most retailers today is that they are not designed for hybridization of that kind, to create hybridization of that kind. So again, in order to do that, there has to be, and I say, for lack of a better term, almost a safe space within the organization where those key players can be brought in, and they're going to be a very, in terms of lines of business, from a traditional sense, a very disparate group. They're going to be, you may have some designers, you may have a chef, you may have a lighting expert. You're going to have all of these kind of different brains in the mix. And with this group, that will be your team that you then take through process. But at the same time, while you have this team that will help you create upfront and build, it's also imperative that you build in line and in with the ultimate vision of that product or that space that you've been given, where someone is saying to you, this is what we need, here's who we're trying to capture. So you're balancing both worlds at the same time. But I believe that when we look at experience in a non-collaborative way, and we say, well, I'm going to create an entertainment experience or whatever it is by just using that line of business, that's a very dangerous place to be in this day and age. Because just considering the media that everyone has in the palm of their hands, they're expecting engagement in every sense and in every way all the time. So when they go into a space, their expectation is that it will be seamless. Their expectation is that everything they want to see and do is going to, exist in that singular sphere at that time, and it's going to be really cool and post-ready. So
And they've never seen it before anywhere
and they've
else.
never seen it before,
And it'll be different tomorrow.
and it'll be different tomorrow, right? That's the other thing. So don't build it for long term. So collaboration is that key ingredient to do it. At least I would say,
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, one thing that has helped is to start thinking about share of time as opposed to share of wallet. I think most retailers think of, we really need a piece of the budget, and they're thinking of the monetary budget. And I think that when you shift that thinking to when you want a shift of time, time away from a device, time inside your experiential space, when you start thinking of that, you actually have an opportunity to create experiential pieces that matter, that could be monetized correctly and would end up getting you that, maybe not right there. It may be that the share of wallet happens a month afterwards when people remember what a great experience they have, and they end up, going into a different channel to acquire the product. But there was no other place where you could have delivered that and gotten a share of the person's time.
Yes.
And I think that's when you're able to work, and that requires multidisciplinary thinking, because a single kind of like line of business or a single discipline is not able to actually capture time.
Yes.
Like,
You bring up a great point there. If I just wanted to add to that, we've been, I think as retailers, all of us, for so many years, everything is return on investment and that ROI. And to begin to shift the thinking that we may now have an ROE, return on engagement, right? And what might that look like, whether it is impressions or how do you measure that connectivity, right? Capturing the heart, capturing the mind. That's really what needs to be done to win the long-term game. And it really is a total shift in how we actually measure the success of our projects and our endeavors, really.
It absolutely is. Not to get off on a tangent, but I think, within retail organizations, sometimes you have, the e-commerce team over here, and then you have the physical retail store team over here, and they're competing with one another within the same organization.
Yes.
So I think a culture change is absolutely, due, so that we understand it's like we're supporting the same brand, we're on the same team, and just because I don't necessarily sell something in the store and I sell it on the website, that's not a win for the website and a lose for the store. It's a win for the brand.
Yeah, for the brand,
So
yes.
I was just going to say that it's something that I think everyone struggles with. That question that you have, like, I think auto manufacturers and the auto industry has had that conundrum, which is they have an experience that today, for the most part, is happening offline. It's happening in physical spaces, even though there's some great disruptors in the space. It's primarily happening there. But I don't think there's a single process today of a major purchase like a car or home that doesn't begin with some process that happens online. So thinking of the experience holistically and capturing the data from the beginning to the end to see where you need to put some of your effort is it's really, I think, the place to be. So yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
And Mary, I skipped you on this one. So just opportunities for collaboration, opportunities or lessons learned from your perspective and where you sit.
Right. Well, I think that to tell the right story, to make a brand experience in a space, I think that that's really the big shift that we're talking about. Is that retail has to be more about brand experience than exactly about selling something. I think that takes it takes the right mix of people to implement the technology, people to write the right software, people to be really innovative, and you have to empower each of these actors and everyone in the team to bring, their best to the work.
Absolutely. How do we do that, guys? What are the best ways, I guess, culturally within your organizations to kind of start breaking down those barriers and start making that point that, hey, if we all kind of collaborate from the beginning of the process, we're going to have a better end result?
I think it's about research. For us, since we're always doing client work, we have to really do a lot of discovery to make sure that we've identified all of the stakeholders. Okay. Often the team that comes to us, they're not the people who are going to have the final say, or the stakeholder is going to be engaged. I'm sure this happens within your organizations, they're very large. And and for the project to be fully successful, we do have to meet the needs of a lot of different people and balance them.
Yeah. Absolutely, that makes sense.
I think for us it's a difficult shift because organizations are their processes are modeled after the departmental structure. I think that happens, and when we do that, we end up with these linear processes that have like approvals and handoffs and things like that in the real world, when you have something successful, it's not an accurate representation of what happened. Things that focus on the end user, that focus on the person, not even the customer yet, but the people, right? Which may or may not be customers. I think those processes force a little bit more collaboration internally. Processes like design thinking, which we were talking about previous to that, are deeply, have a deep requirement of understanding the end user, or the end utility of what we're building, without having to say this is a multidisciplinary team. Let's get people. One person from each department. It's like, no, it's like, what are we trying to have the person do? And if it has to do with lights, then let's let's bring someone that knows how to do that, right?
It's funny because it sounds so common sense, but unfortunately, when
It's
we
not.
get
Yeah.
deep into these things, unfortunately, it is not always the case.
You end up finding projects are underway when it's like a Band-Aid. Same for us, and probably same for you guys, where you're brought into, it's like, hey, we did this, and I don't know why we did it, so can you fix it?
We'd like to know if it works, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely, and you brought up a great point, which is design thinking, and I think that is definitely one way to kind of, affect some culture change and kind of get everyone bought into the process, early on. And Megan, I know you apply that as well with your team. If you would just talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's one of the challenges of when your product services so many people. So if you think about coming to Walt Disney World, right? Who exactly is that? That is everything from the smallest little child who's so excited for that trip all the way to their grandparents and great-grandparents who are all part of the family unit. And I think at any point for any organization, when you are creating something, it is very difficult to stand back and say, well, who is this for? Because your first instinct is to say, well, it's for, men of this specific age group, or it's for women of this specific age group. And it's really not you're really not understanding why it is that they may or may not gravitate towards that product or towards that experience. So if your team, and in our case in the lab, that our teams are rotating out, one of the things that you have to do is spend time really understanding who that guest is. And that might be through interviews, watching videos of these people, post as they talk about products and experiences. Whatever that case is, there needs to be an actual solid understanding of what those needs are and those unmet needs. And from that, you're then extracting your business opportunities. So very often, once you've really dug into that section of it, you're able to step away and say, okay, well, when we originally started the project, we thought, well, we just want to increase revenue by X% or something like that, but that's actually not what we're really here to do. We're here to offer a place of community and relationship for a certain group of people who are not able to express this anywhere else, and they're looking to us to do so. In fact, they're actually going out of their way to create communities and games and interactions and functions. Well, if they're doing that, is this something that we, in fact, can offer? So it's understanding that and really turning the problem around to understand what it is that you want to do besides, of course you want to drive revenue, that's always, but I always say to the team, if we can meet this need, the need that the guest hasn't yet vocalized to us, we will, in fact, drive revenue. The rest of it will follow, but you can't go out of the gate with it that way.
Yes.
And then just to exactly that point, you're taking, you're working through those products, through that process and that cycle. And we're fortunate in the fact that we do have a handoff piece where we can hand this to our designers who actually bring it to life and beautifully render it. And, so there's definitely a luxury there, because the visual component within, I think, any organizational culture is so important, to be able to take that then to that core leadership team and say, here's what we discovered, here's who we're targeting, and oh my God, doesn't this look amazing? And then everyone's on board.
Everyone's happy.
Right,
Yeah.
that's part of how you're using your process.
That makes sense. And Mary, from your perspective, how important it is not only for your client to communicate that to you, but also for them to have an understanding themselves internally and be able to tell you exactly what they're looking for and exactly what they're hoping to achieve?
I think it's always so interesting. Every client is different, and usually we're setting out to create something that's really abstract, like a sense of community, or to foster pride in employees. And so
those are easy
right,
things.
they're easy things.
With the built environment, just go for it.
And so I think that we're also always thinking of that in terms of a specific space and a particular architectural condition or the intention for an architectural space. And so that helps make it concrete really fast, and there's a little pun there. But then we're able to think about it in terms of program and sequence and creating gathering places and helping to enhance the program and the intent for the space with media and with messaging and with something that can be reactive and participatory, trying to bring technology to also serve these needs and desires so that things can be more personalized or more informative or more immediate and more evergreen or more of the moment.
Yeah, I think you both have mentioned something that for me is a difficult shift, which is sometimes we think we know what we want, but it's not necessarily what people expect or need from the places that we build. And being able to properly observe either people or data in a way that doesn't come with preconceptions. It's a requirement to be able to fulfill those pieces. So, as a way of example, we tend to bucket people into these ideas of personas, like what you were saying. Oh, there's a male, and it's this, and we make these stories for them on our minds. And I've been, in my previous life, we print life-size representations of them, and we put them in the room so that they're with us. And in the end, that may have nothing to do with it. Yeah. Observation may tell you that the only thing that matters is if someone has a pet or not. That's the only, but that requires that you're able to shed the preconception of people act in a way that's like grouped by these ideas that we have, either from a demographic perspective or even in a core psychographic perspective, and say, no, you know what, I'm actually going to do observation. Yes. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at, I'm just going to ask them, did you have a good time? And then I'll note whatever it was that I can note on them. And in the end, if I have the people that had a good time and I realize that it's because they didn't have pets with them, it means that I don't have water for the pets in my restaurant, or I don't have, there's a whole variety of things that you could think of that, which I think is where that either data extraction process or a very thorough kind of understanding of what people need to do in a given space allows us to shift the way that we think, so that we're not trying to work inside, because those are silos, right? Those are things that were created by siloed organizations that have low collaborative mechanisms, so that you say, oh, by doing this, we get people to collaborate. It's like, no, actually, by looking at reality, we may get people to collaborate a little bit more.
I love how that you say that, because I think one of the things that is so difficult to convey in this work, specifically in design thinking and an organizational context, is the idea of, well, why don't we just go ask people what they want? They will tell us. We will do interviews, and they're going to say, and no. The truth is, no, they're not. You have to, God, if only, right? That would be wonderful. But you have to observe, and then you have to infer from what you've observed, from what you saw, from what you read, from what they said to you. But they cannot tell you what that unknown thing is. If they could tell you, then you really haven't created anything at all. Really, I mean, it's just an incremental change, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's actually from inferring in the gray space that you have. That's when you know you have something new. So, yeah, that's a great.
I think that's true. A lot of the time, the end user or whoever that might be can't tell you exactly what they want, but you can learn enough about them to help justify the design decisions.
Yes, and understand.
Just that inference process, which is different from like that direct typification.
Exactly. And Juan, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that oftentimes you're your own customer. Yeah. So I'm curious, how does that make that more difficult, or does that make that process easier?
It makes it infinitely more difficult.
It does.
Because this is one of those places where, at least to get things moving along, existing mechanisms creates nice lines. So some person permits, some person builds, some person designs, and then you operate. But when you are building and then you're going to operate, you can go back to the builder yourself and say, hey, change it. And we think there's power in that. I think that's why I think we're trying to look for processes that actually allow us to codify that as a natural behavior. Because we were told that if you change things at the very end, you're like making a mistake. And maybe not. Maybe we just need to figure out there's an opportunity to, like a redo card, right, for a portion of it. You can change 20% of the project at the end, and it's fine. But make that typical in the process, because when you're your own customer, you get to do those. And we think that delivers significantly better experiences. In the places that we've actually built, those changes that have been nightmarish internally, because there's no, hey, this is not what we agreed of, this is outside of our, what our agreement is, that it's already built. It's like, no, you know what? It's actually a better idea. It would have been lovely if we had thought about this on paper and not on concrete, but sometimes we'll take care of the concrete. Hopefully not too often. But
it's true.
But
we always try to get into the architectural process right away, while everything is still conceptual in the design development, because it becomes really expensive to go back and change.
But I think it delivers a better experience. So being your own customer has that superpower, which is you get to tweak and change and make it so that you're delivering the best experience possible. It has the downside of you have to make sure that you do it in a moment in the process where you are not affecting cost in a way that makes the return on investment or the return on effort that you have on what you're doing, make it so that it's not a logical thing for you to do.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier, Juan, things are changing so quickly. So it's like that may be a luxury that, while you have the luxury now, that may be a luxury that we all kind of need because we have to keep adjusting as things are changing. So absolutely a great point. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So I was just going to ask for final thoughts from each of you based on our conversation. Just takeaways for the audience, something that, if they could leave with one idea or one piece of advice from each of you, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to start with you, Mary.
Well, I think since we're here at InfoComm, I think that what I really wanted to share is that it's always so important to be able to bridge the world of technology and innovation and really be able to bridge that to these loftier, goals around community or, innovating the brand. And so I think that it's always important to be able to synthesize that.
Absolutely. Great. Megan?
I think after practicing, regardless of the creative practice or process that you're using with your teams, whether it's standard CPS or maybe you're using design thinking, whichever it is, always remembering that there's what you do in person with the team that is very much absolutely part of the process and what will generate content. But then there's also an invisible piece, and to not be afraid to engage in that invisible piece. And that's working and sensing with those people who are in the room, perhaps new to the process, new to the team, and seeking them out and making that connectivity happen. There's the hardest part, I believe, of design work sometimes happens behind the scenes, and sometimes having that feeling or that call of when you need to connect or engage, especially when people are working with you for the first time all of the time, if your process is in fact different, if it's not from where they normally, their normal line of business, and not to be afraid to do that it's okay to just use your instinct and say, well, I know I'm going off book here. Sometimes being off book is a good way to be. Put your process to the side and seek the human, and you can get very far with that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Now, I would say that for me, I think it's understanding collaboration as something that happens throughout the process, right? I think we expect collaboration at the design charrette, right? And then it stops. And we find that normally it works better if you go way before that. It's a lot easier to integrate technology with the technologist, right? Because they will be able to, instead of you trying to force a use case into something that doesn't want to act that way, it doesn't want to do this, so it becomes incredibly expensive and it becomes incredibly time-consuming, and you're doing something that conceptually the systems are not able to provide. Whereas if you had this conversation early enough, you could have just understood how that works, and then if it didn't have an impact on the way that you were delivering the experience, you could actually modify that and have a significantly easier implementation process. So that's one, and then it only counts if you build it, which is the other side of the collaboration, right? Which is, I feel bad for Post-its on boards because there's the best ideas in the world maybe there, right? And like we spend time and we rank them and we put them in like quarters, and we do all the things that allow us to think collaboratively as groups, but a lot of those things die. And they never make it through. So there's an opportunity maybe for rehashing some of those Post-its or ideas towards the end of the process to say, there's an opportunity for collaboration now. Of course, you won't be able to influence as much as a built environment as you were earlier, but maybe this is a good time to take that idea that sounded a little bit crazy, but it's implementable now that we have a space.